Hi and welcome to BeatleDave's Beatles channel. Today's video I'm going to be showing my top 10 rarest vinyl LPs. So settle back and come and join me. So hello again and welcome to BeatleDave's Beatles channel. Hope I find all you fab Beatles people doing really well out there. And also thank you so much for the messages of support in the last video that I made. I'm very glad also to be back on the tube. So today's video, well, definitely something a little different today because as always, I'm always open to suggestions and I've decided to show what I feel in my Beatle opinion to be my most rarest and most valuable Beatles items in my collection, or albums in this case. So suggested by John Rocker. How you doing, John? This has not been an easy choice for just 10 items. But you know, let's be honest, the word rare is battered about all the time and totally overused with particular records. You know, really, I genuinely only consider something rare if there's only a few hundred copies, or it's virtually like a one-off item or one of a kind. But personally, you know, I don't consider the Please Please Me Stereo Gold album that rare, as you see them all the time going for various sums of money. But then on the other hand, if you're looking for a stone cold mint one, well, then generally it would be very hard unless you had about £10,000 to buy one, should you ever get the chance if one came up for sale. And actually also the same applies to the Let It Be box set, which really isn't part of this list because, you know, it's a box set and I'm going to do a separate one on that later on. But you know, they are certainly not that rare, but finding a nice mint one can generally be really hard and would probably be around, or cost you around about £1,000, and hopefully one would hope it included the Apple poster inside. I certainly remember though, back in the 1980s, picking up virtually all the Beatles original 45s for around about £1 each in mint condition. And then obviously with the advent of CD and the Beatles catalogue being released from 1987, people began to sell off their collections, and in the early 1990s I was picking up original Beatles albums for about £20 to £40 each in top condition. But when you talk about demand, well then that's really where it all begins. Because hypothetically though, you know, had the Beatles remained a local Liverpool band who were a mediocre band with just a few hits in the UK, or a few big hits in the UK, but not worldwide, then obviously demand for their records would obviously not be nearly as big, and prices would most certainly be just fairly average across the board. So it's, you know, it's that huge demand for Beatles records, mainly from the 1960s, that helps keep the prices rising into the stratosphere, and of course their worldwide appeal always helps as well. You know, also though, another contributing factor towards upwards pricing is actually Beatles events through the years. And obviously one of the biggest events in the last 30 years must be the anthology period. So many people became fans or were reintroduced to the Beatles during that particular period, and as well as, of course, more recently with obviously the Get Back documentary or the Let It Be films on Disney. But you know, of course, now very soon we're going to get the anthology series once again, and it's going to be back for another generation of fans and collectors. So with my top 10 then, I've basically based them on both rarity and value, but mainly after researching as to how much these items have sold for in and around the last 10 to 15 years, as some of them rarely come up for sale. Right, so just before we get to that fabulous top 10, of course, it's time for I Call Your Name. So yes, it's on to those fabulous old shout-outs, and it's a great big Beatle Dave hello to Gerard McMullin. How you doing, Gerard? James Chavez, Edward Clark, Christopher Kennel, Nathaniel Culver, Craig Warner, Trevor Brown, Back Bacon and Beer, sounds like a good idea, Arthur Light, Beat Met, Alf Ching, Mark Fogden, Steel F100 and FBT. So that's a massive hi to all of you fabulous Beatles people from yours truly, Beatle Dave. Right, so now it's time for a look at my top 10 of what I feel to be the most rarest and most valuable items in my collection. So please, come and join me. Okay, so I've just chosen 10 items to make a top 10, but I've probably got multiple records I could have chose around the same sort of value. But it's obviously very hard to make a definitive list, but generally I've gone with lesser seen items than the likes of mono white albums or 6061 Revolver, etc. So as I go along, I'll let you know the average price of one sold in the past on the likes of eBay and Discogs.
Number 10.
So number 10, and the first one in the list, it's a final UK pressing of Hey Jude. Now this is officially was released in the UK in 1979, and its final pressing was actually in the late 1980s, early 1990s, when it didn't sell very well. And there was also a version with a white label, possibly a promo, but it's unknown. You know, I didn't pay a lot for this on eBay some years ago, but general value I would say around £250 to £300 in nice condition.
Number 9.
So on to number 9. Number 9. Number 9. No, it's not the White Album, but it is a pressing from 1968, and it's an earlier album, of course, which is Beatles for Sale. And this one is a stereo second pressing from approximately 1968 of Beatles for Sale. And of course it's one of those little oddities that's turned up over recent years, and this one's got a misspelling of loser. I'm a loser with 2 S's. You know, it's not a mind-blowing rarity, but certainly not one that you see very often. And I can't actually remember where I bought this one from, but mint value you're probably talking around £300 to £350.
Number 8.
Well, we're at number 8, and it's a relatively newish rarity, and this one is actually from 1999, and of course it's a pressing of Rubber Soul with a White Apple label. So these records were somehow strangely pressed with a White Apple label, not too dissimilar obviously to the John Lennon Plastic Ono Band one, but no one seems to know or have any information other than as soon as it was discovered, it was withdrawn. You know, it's a reasonably rare item, certainly not hundreds around, so value-wise you'd probably look, going on previous sales and current auction sites, I would say around £400 is a pretty fair price in mint condition.
Number 7.
So number 7 then, and it's another modern day rarity out of this top 10 I'm showing, and it's from Apple, but it's not that Apple, it's Apple iTunes, and it's the Tomorrow Never Knows album from 2012, just 13 years ago. Made in conjunction with EMI and Apple Corps, the LP was created to celebrate the $15 million worth of streaming revenue, and it was made as a thank you gift to the Apple iTunes staff. It was a limited run of 1,000 copies with strict instructions not to sell the album or they would face disciplinary action. So prices are varied on this actually. The highest was over £1,200 at its peak, and there's a few around now which are less than half that, but personally I think it's a value of about £450 to £500 I would say is about right in mint condition. Beware of counterfeits.
Number 6.
So with the number 6 position then, we've got an album that was given away free back in December 1970, and it is of course the Beatles' From Then to You Christmas Fan Club LP. And this album was distributed free to anyone in the fan club at that particular time, and as a final gesture for the fans, even though the Beatles themselves were long gone, this album was sent out that Christmas, which included all 7 Beatles Christmas discs recorded from 1963 to 1969. Well, you know, it's not that relatively rare, and it can be difficult though to find a really mint one these days, but value I would say is around £500 to £600, but personally it's a great exclusive fan club collector's item.
Number 5.
Moving on then, it's a mono copy of Help at 5th place, but it's not just any mono copy. This one was released in the late 1969 on the One Box EMI label, straight after its final black and yellow issue. So at the time, mono was pretty much obsolete, but EMI released Sgt. Pepper, Please Please Me and Help in mono with the new label design. Now, the best selling of these was Sgt. Pepper followed by Please Please Me, and the third one being Help, which virtually sold none at all, with maybe only a few hundred being pressed, and that was the end of that. So, wow, what makes this particular issue a little bit more special is that there is no mono indicator top right on the front of the sleeve, but obviously it has the mono catalogue number on the reverse. And I've got to say, I've only ever seen one sleeve like this, and this is it. I've never seen another. So while researching these items, the only other one of these sold was back in 2021 for €1,000, and that copy actually had the outline mono indicator as you would have got on the original 1965 issue. So, you know, this is one incredibly rare record, and I paid about £40 for it a few years ago, and now possibly it's worth maybe £700 to £800 in nice condition.
Number 4.
Right, yes, we're on to number 4, and it's what I consider really not that rare an album, but it's one of those records that's big in demand, and of course it's the black and gold Please Please Me mono, with this one being the Northern Songs credit on the labels, which is obviously one of the rarer ones of the black and gold variants. So, only available then for a short time, the black and gold label design was eventually made way for the new Parlophone black and yellow type one that we all know and love. But you know, why change the label during an LP's first few weeks? It's very strange. But anyway, prices for the black and gold mono in this sort of condition, you know, they're around about £1,000. But you know, you get obviously lesser condition ones going for a lot less.
Number 3.
So an offering from the USA then, and without doubt this one is probably the most notorious release, which was then almost immediately withdrawn. It is of course the Beatles' Yesterday and Today, otherwise known as the Butcher cover. So on initial release, Capitol basically got so many complaints that the album was withdrawn, so any copies sold were obviously known as the First State cover. Capitol then pasted the new trunk cover on top of the original Butcher cover, and these were known as the Second State cover. Now these were obviously put back into circulation, but word soon got out with many fans trying to peel off the pasted over cover to reveal the Butcher cover, and these were the Third State covers, which is what I have here. But once again, these are probably not terribly rare, but a real professional job like this particular one can possibly fetch anything from about £800 to about £1,000 on a good day.
Number 2.
So maybe this is going to be a little bit controversial with number 2, but in my opinion there's no doubt that this record is rarer than the number 1 position record. But for various reasons, and obviously demand hasn't quite got to Beatle collectors yet with this one, but mainly though it's still a very newly found rarity. However, it's 100% correct that this copy of With the Beatles was pressed in late 1969 at Hayes with a very small mono on its sleeve. Pressed on an EMI machine then, it has a ridge around the outside of the labels synonymous with that machine, and along with a limited pressing of around 200 copies, you know, if to find a half decent one is very hard indeed. Now, I personally feel that this is one really rare record, and demand for a 69 mono with the Beatles isn't that huge. So rarity value then is high, but value technically is more of a conservative £600 to £800. Hi pop pickers, and welcome to BeatleDave's Top 10 Rarest and Most Valuable Beatles LPs. In at 10, it's the final UK pressing of the album Hey Jude, with the black Parlophone labels from the late 1980s. At 9, the Beatles are for sale, but only if you can find this stereo misspelling from 1968. Bouncing in at number 8, it's the 1999 withdrawn copy of Rubber Soul with the white apple labels. In at 7, it's the limited Apple iTunes employee pressing of Tomorrow Never Knows from 2012. At 6, Christmas Time is here again with the Fabs, and it's the fan club only release LP From Then to You from 1970. On to the top 5 now, with at 5th place, it's the ultra rare final mono issue of Help on the One Box EMI label from the late 1960s. In at 4 we've struck gold. Mono Gold. It's the Please Please Me Northern Songs Parlophone Gold label. At 3, it's that ultra rare capital withdrawn third state butcher sleeve of Yesterday and Today. At the number 2 spot, it's the ultra rare Haze pressed with the Beatles mono, with the small mono sleeve from late 1969. So it's time to reveal the number 1.
Number 1.
So yes, we've reached the number 1 position, and my most valuable Beatles record I have, but actually in my opinion not necessarily the rarest, is the record that only came to me back in January this year after 40 years of trying to find one, and it was courtesy of Triumphant Records. And yes, it's the Please Please Me Stereo Gold from 1963 with the rarer Northern Songs credit. But you know, I suppose the biggest question about this record is how many were pressed. Well, some sources say around 900 copies and some say much more than that, but I don't suppose we're ever going to know unless some paperwork could be found to confirm this. But obviously, regardless, this record is very desirable and clearly one that's in demand by most Beatles record collectors, and in this sort of condition it's very hard to find. Obviously they're out there, and sometimes they're of a lesser condition, obviously of a lesser price, but generally these go for around about 8 to 10,000 in roughly around mint condition. So the last thing I want to say then is remember that this is what I think is 10 of the most rare and valuable Beatles records in my collection, and is only really what my own particular views are, but there's always peaks and troughs with Beatles values, and really, you know, a record is only worth how much someone is willing to pay for it, isn't it? Well, that's pretty much it today, guys, and why not tell me what you think, what I've done today, you know, what I've shown today, you know, do you agree with what I've shown? Was there anything I should have put in the list? But anyway, just let me know if you want to see more of these sort of top 10 of rare items, videos, etc. You know, and if you've got your own channel, why don't you do your own sort of top 10 yourself? Also, please don't forget any comments or communication I get from any of you Beatle people about today's video or any of the other videos that I've made in the past. I will of course come back to you just as soon as I can. So everybody, we're going to see you on the next video, and anyway, as always, if you enjoy what I'm doing, why not give us a like, subscribe and hit that notification bell so that you don't miss out on any future videos. This is BeatleDave signing off.